I'm sure that Jeanette has something that she's working through right now. Seen her twice this week. We spent a lot of time together over the past few weeks. And then I've sent notes to Madonna and Sal. And so I think from there we'll go. So meeting is live. We are on YouTube, hitting the got it button. And Jim, whenever you're ready to kick things off.
Yeah. Have at it.
All right. So happy August, everyone. I hope the summer has treated you well and continues to treat you well. For the mission moment tonight, I'm going to dive into an item which is directly in our agenda in the school leader report and is a big measure for us as a school when we think about outcomes and impact. So that is our graduation rates and specifically our graduation rate for this year. So let me share my screen with you and we'll look at that together. So I'm looking at the school leader report, which you all have access to, and I'll be referring to that mightily over the course of tonight's meeting. So we received, we have graduation data both internally and then from the state in terms of our reporting and then them giving us back something. This table presents a bit of the historical on where we are. We are the green bars, the state average are the blue bars. And so you'll note the years down below represent the year in which a cohort came into the 9th grade. And so we just graduated the students who came to us in the fall of 2018. So they are the entry cohort of 2018. And this is all students. And so you see, we've done well relatively over the past 2 years with our first 2 cohorts. We don't yet have data on state level average graduation, but I suspect it'll be somewhere in the mid 80s as it's been over the past couple of years. And so I would assume that we did outperform the state pretty significantly in terms of our kids earning diplomas in 4 years. So that's exciting for us. We'll have that data, probably not for a few months, but exciting nonetheless when thinking about kind of where we've been and where we continue to be in terms of kids succeeding graduation rise and having outcomes or windows open to them, doors open to them beyond graduation. So this is all students. It's also important to look at, are there any questions here before I move on to a couple of other groups of interest? Cool. So I'll look at also our students who are classified as having disabilities. And you see the same data presentation is the same. We are the green bars, state are blue. And so you'll see that over the past 2 years, 3 years, we've significantly outperformed the state with regard to the number or percentage of students who are graduating who have disabilities versus the state. And so we don't have data on the state as of this year, but I assume state will come in at about the mid 60s. And so we had 7 students who were classified as having disabilities this year. They all earned a diploma. So good things there too. Any questions or insights here? I find that the state averages to be pretty staggering with regard to how low they're in looking at this subgroup.
Yeah, Josh, there was press recently, not necessarily reputable, but about how graduation rates are somehow meaningless because schools are lowering requirements. Is that something we're concerned about? Or?
Well, I'm gonna jump to one slide that we looked at last November in a moment that I think will address some of that question. The short answer is no, I'm not. In terms of what it means for kids and doors open, I'd be more concerned if they didn't earn that diploma. Economically, if for nothing less. So in looking at our students who are classified as economically disadvantaged based on household income, same pattern emerges. 97% of our students, I think we had 33 students of our 55 who classified as economically disadvantaged, and 32 of them earned a diploma in 4 years. And so versus the state average, we are significantly higher than the average in the state of New York. So I think these are really good. Why are they good? I want to show you one thing that we looked at a little while ago as a part of an analysis looking at college persistence last November. All right. I think for many reasons, but perhaps the main reason is like there are significant challenges for students not earning a diploma in 4 years or at all, economically in terms of opportunities employment-wise. And so this table borrowed from the Bureau of Labor Statistics offers some of that. And so you see in this table here, the weekly earnings of students who don't have a diploma versus those that do, versus those that have some college. And I should mention that of the students that graduated this past year, 90% of them are headed to college this fall. So when looking at real outcomes, providing for themselves, families having jobs, sufficient jobs, gainful employment, these numbers are important. So I think for no other reason, like making sure our kids don't have those barriers in front of them when they're in high school, once they graduate, et cetera, is invaluable to their future. And so I take this data, to be perhaps the most important thing we can do for kids, and having them have experiences that are beneficial to them, and that level the playing field for them once they're beyond high school. Any insights here? Well, and with that, that is the mission moment for tonight.
All right. All right, you want to jump into the head of school report?
Yeah, I will. So I'm going to share my screen constantly over the course of this evening. And so excuse the length of this report tonight. There's just a lot of new information, both just because it's August and we're launching the year, and then we got a whole host of data that came in over the past few weeks, and we've been analyzing it pretty consistently over the past few weeks. And so I just say this: we have staff back this week at both sites, and so we're fully in it. Full staff returning. We're now preparing for an event next week. We're preparing for the launch of the school year on the 7th, orientations, et cetera. So it's a busy time, but it feels good. I will say at both sites, I do feel as if the leadership teams at both sites are perhaps the most seasoned that we've had since we opened. And so I feel really good about those teams doing the good work at the site level in leading the way with some of the outcomes that matter most to our kids. So I think with that, there are a few things I want to mention. In terms of things that are kind of keeping me up at night or are on my mind constantly at this point in time and moving into the year, because someone's dropping something off. And so I would say there are three things. First, just the launch and the sheer volume of stuff coming our way. In my school year report, I mentioned some of the things that are kind of competing for time right now, including what's listed here, where we've got the renewal report out. Chris has been working and Alex has been working on the annual reporting. That's out of the way. We've got a big festival going on next week. And then there's all of the work and kind of getting the machinery up and running, from development and training going on to updating our goals and targets for the year based on the data we have. Some policy shifts here and there, updates with regard to the summative data practices we use. All of those things are happening now. And so getting those in good form by the first day of school is important. So I think one is just sheer volume and launching in the strongest way possible. In addition to that, staffing, I'll mention specifics about staffing momentarily, but we do have some vacancies and it's mid-August. So making sure that there are good, talented folks in front of our kids is crucial. So some work being done there. So I'd say the third thing is just around data analysis and having good information at hand as we make decisions about how to best negotiate the school year. And so with this flurry of data coming in, now digesting it and utilizing it in a way that best allows us to support kids, I think is maybe the third piece that's been on my mind and has required some attention. So I name those three things right now in terms of what is a priority for me. So I'm going to move into staffing and just providing an update there, and you'll see things, you'll see these in the school year report. And so you've been able to look this over already. But right now we have 8 vacancies at the school across sites. And over the past 2 weeks, we had a couple of folks who resigned. One took a position at a high school, was a middle school learning specialist. One is going back to earn their doctorate, but let us know only recently. And then the third got a school counseling gig. They were a learning specialist and were interested in making that move, so they got in the job. So there's been some movement, and that's hard at this point in the year. The positions we have listed across the middle school and high school are here. So I think the good news here is that we don't have any content lead positions open, core content positions open at this point in time. So you'll see learning specialists mentioned, you'll see an ENL teacher at the middle school mentioned, computer science at the high school, PE at the high school, a humanities learning specialist at the middle school. So, there's positions we want to fill here, but in comparison to years where I've had an opening in 7th grade math, that isn't the case this year. And so that makes me feel a little bit better about our flexibility in the short term, filling in if we need to. But again, the priority is in finding good people to serve kids in these positions. In terms of things we're doing right now, there's a morning email that goes out every day after kind of looking over our job sites and identifying any promising candidates. And we're circling up with those folks same day. So within 24 hours of getting an application, if it's adequate, we are following up. We are offering a referral bonus of $3,000 to our staff for introducing us to folks who might be someone who we hire and bring on and then retain for the course of the full year this coming year. And then, we're paying for a number of posts on various sites, including Indeed. And so that's the work we're doing. And so it's a competitive time, as it's been for the past year and a half, 2 years. And so even today, I think there was an interview at the middle school. We've got one lined up for tomorrow, perhaps at the high school for the PE position. So action happening, but it's a grind.
How do you cover it if you can't fill them before school opens?
Last bullet, yeah. So that's some of the work we're doing. So I think some of that can happen internally. So for example, we may have someone who's teaching 4 or 5 classes who may have a bit of flexibility in their schedule, who might then, with an additional stipend, fill in that additional position. So we're thinking about kind of ways in which we do that. And we've done that in the past. And in some cases, that's a safe bet because you've got people who who you've hired, who've done the work, who are then chipping in. So that's been kind of our best use of resources when we meet together.
Okay.
So that's sort of an update on where we are and where we're looking to move with regard to hiring and staffing. Any other kind of like ideas, insights, et cetera, that this team might provide? Cool. So I'm going to move us on to just some of the miscellaneous updates. We're going to talk through a lot of the data during the SLC portion of tonight's call. So I'm going to skip over that and move on in to page 11 and 12 of this report. And I'm just going to shout out a couple of things that might not come up in other times. Pardon me, Sal is sending a text that he might be here. Yeah. Chris, if Sal joins, just let in, please. So in terms of miscellaneous updates, I'd say this. In terms of safety guidance, we will be abiding by the DOE's current guidance. I've offered a link there so you can sort of see what is being recommended there. In terms of bullet points on what they're recommending, we will continue with making tests available in the case of a positive confirmed case. And so allowing for others to sort of test and make sure that they are okay to be in school. So that'll continue for both students and staff. In the event of a positive case, a student must isolate for 5 days and then return to school on day 6 if they have no symptoms. Students and staff do not need to isolate after an exposure. There won't be any daily health screenings. Masks will not be required, except in a couple of places at our middle school, including the nurse's office. And in terms of vaccinations, we're going to hold to our policy that we had last year of it being required and offering some level of exemption. And then ventilation sort of stays constant with regard to what practices we abide by. So those are some of the headlines. Chris or Melissa, would you add anything else in terms of specifics?
No.
So that will be announced to families on Friday. I don't expect there to be any issues there, but that's our thinking based on the guidance we've received thus far. Other updates here, miscellaneously. So we do have a new liaison with the state as of July 25th. A woman named Paula Orlando, who I've now met on 2 occasions via Zoom, will replace Paolo Giovanni. They work together. It's kind of a handoff because of some of the work that Paolo is also involved in, and so it made sense for David Frank's team to do so. We've had 2 good calls with her, so I'm excited to work with her, and she keeps in touch with Paolo. So it's been fairly smooth thus far, but it's something that I think this board should just be aware of. Relatedly, according to Paula, there will be a renewal visit happening later this fall, late October, early November. Many of you took part in this a few years ago when we were in Brownsville and in Bed-Stuy, and so same experience with a focus group, I imagine, embedded. And so just a heads up there, I don't have dates yet. Paula will send it when she has them. Another update. And I think that's all. There may be one other update I wanted to provide. Oh, just that we did finally receive our midterm report from the state. This was a visit remotely back in April, May of 2021, so more than a year ago. It was frustrating not to receive that report. We talked about it when we submitted our renewal application. It was sent to Jen and me last week. And I think just generally speaking, I will send it out tomorrow to the full board. Generally, across each of the benchmarks that are used to assess schools, we received a meeting or approaching level across the board. So no major red flags, no major green flags, I think similar to what we received before. And so I'll send that out and we can revisit it in a month if people would like to. My sense of things is that it was a remote visit. We were in remote land at that point in time. And so a lot of the reporting is based on some of that, particularly with teaching and learning. And so I don't know if it offers the kind of value that would have been provided with an in-person, more recent report. So I'll leave it at that unless people have specific questions. And Jim, if you'd like to add anything at all, please do.
No, did she indicate whether this is in fact going to be in person?
This would be in person.
Okay.
That I'm 99% sure. There was no indication that it wouldn't be. And so I think we're back in person.
Okay.
So we'll hit on the other items here within the committee report outs momentarily. And so I think that would close out where we are with the report for this month.
Great. You want to just keep going?
Yeah, I will. Let's see. So I'm going to close out and reshare a screen. And so we're going to go to the dashboard. It's August, so we're essentially ready to close out the 21-22 dashboard with each of the measures and areas of school that we look at. So I'm going to do that one by one. It'll take a little more time, but I think it's good to kind of pay homage to each of the areas of school that we tend to look at each month or every couple of months. And so for each of these, I've gone through them, and based on my analysis, you can check me on this, offered kind of like whether we've met the target, whether we've partially met the target or not met the target, green, yellow, pink. Across the board, I would say that the summary here is that, I'm pulling it up. Summary here is that we met 6 of our 12 targets. We partially met 4 and didn't meet 2. And so let's begin. So with student recruitment, as you can see here, we ended up at about 94% of our target enrollment over the course of the year at 515. The latest month, probably 519 on average over the course of the year. And so we didn't meet kind of our target there. We knew that. We looked at this monthly. We've talked about kind of where we are, and that 7th grade was a bit of a divot in comparison to the other grade levels and how much we're utilizing the seats that we have available to families. And so not met, that's where we are. I'll say more about this incoming predicted enrollment further down. Are there any questions here? With regard to demographics, just going rather quickly through this is based on October levels, which is a major kind of reporting time for the school. It's called Beds Day. And so looking at demographics, we're in good form with regard to serving a representative body of students based on our district at large. And so in many cases, we serve more special populations than the district, and that bodes well in terms of serving kids who perhaps are least served well by the system. So that's a good thing. Table 3 looks at student attrition, met that target as well. We ended up having an attrition rate of 5.2%. Target was 10%, so well under that when looking at number of students leaving our school over the course of the year. So not a lot of movement. On the finance end of things, I have this classified as partially met. And the only thing that I have us not meeting, which is preliminary at this point in time, as Alex and team finish up the annual reporting, is that we had 45 days on cash as of June 30th versus a target of 90. As you know, that wavers month to month. Please stop me if you have any questions about any of these indicators. Student attendance wise, we ended up overall at about 86% over the course of the year. Our goal was 92, so we were 6 percentage points below our target. This was a year in which attendance was lower because of the pandemic. There were more kids who were sick, more parents keeping kids home. That was recommended by us, and so we should expect there to be a decrease versus our prior year. I probably should have adjusted the target in some way to reflect that. I did not. Middle school is close to 88. High school at 85. Nothing more to say there other than we do seek to bounce back and have more of our kids healthy and in school with the pandemic behind us this year. Student attendance by tier. We're going to set some targets for this year. We embedded this new look mid-year through the year, so we didn't have any targets attached, but it's good to kind of look at the percentage of students within each of these sort of bins: severely, chronically absent, sort of absent too much, and in school all the time. So we'll be building that in next month. So I don't really have a rating there or a final conclusion. Table 6 with suspension, we met our target. We wanted to have fewer than 12% of students experiencing a suspension at one time. And so we were at 11% overall. We're doing some things this year. We have now built in peer mediation at the high school and have a point person for that. So they're training up on that now. And then we're doing some more things. I know our dean team at the high school is working with someone outside the school on implementing restorative practices, which is often an alternative to perhaps suspension. And so many of these suspensions, as I've reported out before, happened because of physical altercations offsite, so not in our school, but offsite, where we, as a small school, knew of them, felt like it was still a safety issue, and issued suspensions in those cases. Student recruitment wise, Chris, I'm going to hand the mic to you because I'm talking a lot. What would you say? What would you highlight around this table here?
Cautiously optimistic for the first day of school. We're about 20 students above in enrollment where we were this time last year, late August 2021. I just led a high school tour for about a dozen high school families that are excited to join our school. And we're still actively recruiting for grades 6, 7, 8, and 9. But right now we're just maintaining relationships with our newest and returning students to make sure they're all ready for the first day of school.
Chris, can you talk folks through maybe where 6th grade enrollment is at this time as you see it?
Yeah, I believe we have 110 new 6th graders that have submitted documentation that have told us they're signed up and excited for Unity. That's not to say a handful of them might have done that for other schools as well, but we have enrollment packets and documentation. We have 110 students on our roster right now. 6th graders.
How does that compare to last year? Remember?
We were at about 95, I believe. Oh, no, sorry, right next to it, 98. Yep.
Yeah. So some reasons to be cautiously optimistic about where we are right now. And are there questions about enrollment. We'll know more obviously in 2 weeks, 3 weeks as school kicks off. Usually that first week, there's a whole lot of like, okay, where are we? Who's here? Who's not here? Who's going to be here? All of that.
The eighth grade is it's not a lot of attrition compared to last year. It's just the same small number that's carrying through,
Good
right?
memory. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we're predicting 78th graders. We finished out last year with about the same. We were able to recruit 7 brand new 8th graders from the outside world. But that is definitely our lowest grade at the moment. But we're over enrolling 6th and 7th a bit to make up for it.
Okay, so moving on. Staff retention, this is the first time I've updated this table because we're now close to the sort of end line here, which is August 31st. And so across the board, you'll see kind of retention percentages for middle school and high school, and then for all staff, and then for core content teachers. We just set it up in that way 2 years ago, so I'm rolling with it. And you'll see overall, in terms of all staff, 78% of staff returning from last year to this year, 80% is our target. And then among our core content teachers, teachers of math, ELA, history, and science who are not learning specialists, that retention rate is 80%. So you'll see, I've thought about the sort of who's who in terms of who's not returning, and thought about kind of like where those positions are. And so those are listed as percentages here, where we've 22 folks not returning this year, choosing to leave. And then among that group, 5 who are core content teachers. Any questions here? Stepping back, I feel pretty good about this, and I wish we didn't have any vacancies right now. So mixed feelings. Staff recruitment wise, I've offered this. This is just a table of what I provided in the school year report, so I'll skip over that. In terms of board trustee participation this year, partially met. We had one meeting in February where we didn't have quorum. Beyond that, we've had quorum for all other meetings this year. In terms of developments, while we didn't focus on fundraising and donorship all that much, we did receive some significant grants. So overall, more money raised than what we anticipated. And so I've just classified that as partially met. With regard to family participation, this might be slightly updated versus the version you received in the compressed folder. Goal met. We had a strong showing with roundtables, as we always do at the middle school. And so across the board, average participation is that 71% of families took part in one of these 4 events. At the high school, it was 64%. Overall, 71%. Is that right? Maybe I'll look at the math there. It seems a little off. In any case, we're shooting for 68, so goal met. And next up, with regard to students participating in extracurriculars, which is to me a representation of the well-roundedness of a school and what kids experience wholesomely. We had 55% of our kids at the high school and 82% of our kids at the middle school in the spring taking part in a club or athletics. So that's St. Nick's and our partnership there, or internal clubs at the high school. And so that feels really good. It's a long day for kids, but they're active, learning new stuff, being creative. And so overall, the target was 40%. We were above that in terms of participation. SPED compliance wise, I provided a report back in April. So it was kind of like spring, winter. And at that point in time, things were looking good. There were a few numbers we were waiting for where like we had held all of the IEP meetings we needed to. We were waiting for the CSE to update CSIS. That's been done. I just don't have the final values, but that 83 is probably in the high 90s as of now. So overall in good shape, goal met in terms of kids' IEPs being up to date and our services either being fully provided to them or partially given the services we do offer at the school. And then COVID, not a lot of change. It's something we added mid-year. No targets were attached. We're still at about a third of our kids vaccinated as far as the latest data we have, which was as of mid-June. that's the update. That's where we are. So I don't, there may be one or two tables to revisit in September, but I plan to update this. I plan to spruce things up a little bit and maybe add some more data. If people have any recommendations for data they'd like to see that isn't represented here, I'd love to hear that now. Anything come to mind? This is
Just
meant to
a
sort of offer
question.
general health of school.
Just a question on the last one. I think you just said a little bit ago that the policy was that that people had to be vaccinated, but that you gave exemptions. But those numbers don't seem to align with that. So do you have?
Yeah, no,
like-
the only, just to clarify, staff requirements, students, there's no
Okay,
requirement.
okay, got it. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so any ideas or anything you'd like to see as you kind of step back and say, as we look at data each month as a board, here's some things that might be useful. What's on my radar, and you'll see it across the bottom of my screen, is a whole bunch of academic data. And we do put that in, that's added in within the SLC agenda. There's lots of tables that we'll look at tonight and tables that you see over the course of the year. It's not a part of our dashboard. But I could see something like that being embedded, and are working on some stuff offline with the data analyst to do that. Are there any other ideas people have, though, that they'd like to sort of see here that is not represented, or perhaps they'd like to see it represented in a slightly different way? Hey, Sal.
Hey, Josh, just one thing before we leave. I think if we had a way to capture this issue of sort of getting close to the beginning of the school year with some seats still open on the staff side, so I think that's really suboptimal, right? So I don't know if there's any way we could, and I know a lot of it is out of your hands, right? Because if somebody resigns in August, then obviously the post is still going to be open in August. But
Yeah.
like, is there anything we can track or do there?
So I have two ideas, and they just cost money. So one would be to recruit and bring on fellows, like sort of teaching interns who are working toward their certification and things, and have them as a sort of backup or pipeline in the event of us having a seat that's unanticipated open up. The other idea would be, and like in July, we thought about this. It's just, many years ago, Ken mentioned this is something he used to do with the DOE, although it was a little different there. You'd overhire. So you just proactively overhire in a couple of areas where you're like, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. We've got someone in June. Let's do it. It may require us going over budget on compensation, but like better to have that be the problem than not have a teacher in front of kids.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is if you overhire in the wrong place, right? But let's talk about that during the year and see what we can come up with for this year. Because I don't know if this is the worst it's been, but it seems that it's a lot of seats sort of very close to the school starting.
I think we're seeing some trends as well, in which seats are vacated. Right now, I think across schools, our learning specialists are the biggest vacancy. Josh, am I correct? And that is incredibly important for legal compliance. And it's also challenging because as we accept enrollment on a rolling basis across the summer, we take our students as they come. So my projected numbers based on Unity Middle School are very different than my actual numbers right now at the high school. So I think that there are targeted areas where we could hire, and planning to overhire early learning specialists who could theoretically also teach a content would be one way to think about that.
Are there like subs or temps or things like that are options, or not really?
We have one at the high school, and that person is currently going to is getting ready to teach PE, which is a graduation requirement that students must take every semester of their high school experience in New York. It's a super
Right.
important one. It's not the first one that like someone might come to mind. They might be like, oh, your math teacher. But so that is already baked into our plan and has been exhausted.
So I think with that, that closes out the dashboard aspect of the meeting tonight. Thanks all for chipping in and taking part in that full assessment.
Josh, my screen is locked on Zoom. I cannot get off this screen, so I can't see the agenda. Can you just keep going?
Different kind of Zoom bomb.
I've got a new mouse charging and we'll get there.
I've got one of those too, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we'll move on to strategic planning. And my thought there was to revisit, and this came from maybe some interest among people here in last month, to revisit the revision of downward expansion, and then also talk about strategy moving forward with that revision proposed. And so I think what I want to do is I want to share my screen one more time and look at some meeting notes from July. And then I want to talk a bit about the merits of perhaps getting some help strategy-wise moving into the fall, such that some of the anticipated challenges we might face in proposing a downward revision are proactively addressed. So let's do that. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I think during the executive session we had, was it only last week before last week, we got into this somewhat. So maybe some of this has been addressed, but I'd love to hear from folks if they've got questions, ideas, etc. I think the first is just like, let's have a conversation about, like, again, the motivations of the downward expansion among board members here. We have now submitted a revision. Doesn't mean we move forward with it ultimately, but as of 2 weeks ago, let's do it and let's go. And so I offered during that call, and then back in June, I offered the sort of same motivations behind why I think this is a good idea for school and for families and kids, both from an education standpoint as well as like from a school health strategic standpoint. And so I highlighted those in yellow here. I can reiterate them if you wish, but maybe I'd open it up and ask if there are questions that folks would like to pose out to each other on this call or to members of the school team. One of the kind of series of questions that came up is like, hey, what would this look like? And so we did get into like what this would look like in terms of what we know now with an elementary school, where there would obviously be more detailed planning as time goes on. As I mentioned during executive session, this would be a 2-year plan. So after getting the green light in the spring, we then sort of say, all right, this is real. We going for it or what? If we are, we then have a 1.5 years to plan.
So Josh, this is Lenny. Is the thought behind the downward expansion that it could help with enrollment and possibly serve as even a greater feeder for the overall program all the way through high school? Like, I'm not sure the percentages of individuals, parents and students who stay with us once they're part of the Unity Prep family, but could it serve as a potential feeder all the way through the end of our program offering?
Yeah, 100%. You nailed it. It's both those things. It would be both a sort of more natural feeder for us. And families have asked for that. They've shown interest in kind of us expanding downward because they're appreciative of what we do at the middle school and high school level. And then it would allow for us just educationally to interact with families and kids over a longer period of time, which, I think we just found that vast majority of our kids are academically coming in low level in some core skills. So we do the job well and work with kids at a younger age so that gap doesn't exist in the same way when arriving to middle school.
And then what is the recruitment process like to have faculty, staff support in the downward expansion? What are the thoughts about how you recruit?
Yeah, there's a lot of outreach. Yeah, obviously there's a lot of outreach that would go on starting in the spring. We leverage our families. I really think we've got a strong recruitment team. I think this is a very competitive atmosphere we're in, but I think relatively speaking, we're better at recruitment than many of our peer schools. And so that's kind of the climate we're in with regard to getting the attention of kids and families. So we would go about things in the same way that we do with our middle school families. We certainly leverage them. And then we'd be hiring some folks come the spring to lead in this work, including leaders.
So the reason I asked the question, particularly around staffing, is you hear reports that there's a shortage of teachers. That may not be the case in the city of New York, but it's definitely something that resonated with me, and it's just curious to see what the contingency plans are if we face that, because none of us want to do an expansion and advertise and promote that we have this, and then staffing issues become a concern.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, particularly given the conversation tonight, where we've got eight openings, and I think there's some ways in which perhaps internally we can reduce a few of them, but still we have some clear openings. And if we opened an elementary school, maybe it's 12 openings we have right now instead of 8, and so we'd be doing the same level of work. We would have more sort of capacity with regard to leadership doing that work. And so in the same way that, Melissa, myself, and a few others are teaming up at the high school to sort of like identify, recruit, and hire key people, we'd be doing that with the elementary school leaders as well.
Yeah. As far as the elementary school goes, I think in the short term, I'm optimistic about staffing that. There are folks who are very excited about being on founding teams, and we would be staffing for probably 2 grade levels, 3 grade levels initially at best. That's if the city permitted a pre-K. So I think that would be simpler to staff than a high school is very complex to staff comparatively. So I foresee that happening long term. Like if this is the trend for a decade or more, we may see something a little bit different, but that would rank lowest in my staffing anxieties as an organization. I think folks would be really excited to be in a founding team.
Maybe one more thought. I appreciate that, Melissa. One more thought that gets me excited, and maybe is a bit of sort of like, wow, that's a little out there, Josh, would be that we're now in a place where our alumni are in their 3rd year of college, 2nd year in college, 1st year in college, and I do know that there are kids that want to teach someday, and they'd be great. And so I think there are some things that perhaps we could do in our school to perhaps cultivate that a bit more. And give kids experiences in high school to kind of see those interests through and see if it's something they're real about, and then keep in touch. But I think that's a real possibility. I know other schools that have had their alumni come back and teach at their school, and they know the school better than anyone. So
no one is a better representative for the school, the curriculum, and engaging with parents than someone who's come through the program and is now teaching. So
yeah,
the excitement is warranted.
In terms of the pool of people who would be available, is it harder to get credentialed to be a K teacher than a 6th grade teacher, or is it similar? Is it easier? Is it?
It's similar. It's similar. There's a series of content. Everybody takes one similar test, and then there's a specific test depending on your certification. So for presentation of portfolios. So it would be more general and more child development focused for an elementary school teacher, whereas like a 6-12 math teacher would be answering math problems.
Got it.
So it's similar process, similar road. But also programs that we partnered with like Relay offer a pathway there too, for all academy levels.
But I think what's helpful here in this conversation, and there will be others, is like with all tough or big decisions, there are kind of pros and cons. And so for us, it's about weighing the benefits versus perhaps some of the challenges that might come up. And then for the challenges that might come up, how do we proactively perhaps minimize them so that this becomes an easier decision or a more confident engagement or endeavor. So I think staffing is something which I think is smart. Enrollment, smart. These are all kind of really good considerations to be thinking about now. So I think with that, we then move into, unless I'll just open it up one more time, any final thoughts before we talk a bit about strategy moving into the fall? Okay, so we talked a bit about this during the July meeting, during the executive session, but I put forth that in speaking with other school leaders and in talking about kind of like what we're seeking to do and the way in which we do it effectively, one of the recommendations that came up was to bring on a lobbyist of some kind to perhaps help us with some of the political aspects of having this approved. And so specifically two school leaders put this forth to me, and they're local, and they've been through some of this before. And so I did some outreach, spoke with Jake, I've spoken with Lenny and a few others offline about this. I've identified someone who I think would be good, who comes recommended to us by at least two school leaders that I know in Brooklyn. I did also speak with another who I thought was solid, but maybe not as education minded or centric as the person who I think would be best for us given what we want here. This person helps with renewal, helps with other aspects of school in addition to perhaps buying for an expansion. We would not need this person for renewal. And this person admitted that. So this is not something you need me for, given where you are. But I think in terms of a downward expansion, there is some benefit to perhaps thinking about working with this person over the coming 6 months. In terms of the scope and what they do, here it is in bulleted form, and I'll give you 30 seconds or so to look this over. As you look it over, as I look it over, these are things that make sense, and they're things that I don't believe our school has the capacity to do on its own, and I don't believe the board has the capacity to do on its own. So these are things that I think are value add, that I think would position us in a way to see a positive outcome in doing the pre-work necessary to have a good outcome, which would be a vote of approval by the Board of Regents in the spring. So I think this does position us and put us in a better place. Not that doing this would be then a layup or a given, but it would put us in a significantly better place. I think about the way in which each of these bullets is executed and the impact it could have on the right stakeholders. The cost of this would be $5,000 a month. This lobbyist who I think would be best for us is a bit cheaper than the other person who was recommended to me, who I spoke with. It'd be a monthly go. So we'd be able to sort of like buy out of this whenever we wanted. And so ideally, the idea would be to move into a partnership come September, start working with this person, and then see how things go over time. This being the scope. If at some point in time we get new information and don't feel like this is a good use of scarce time, we could buy out of it. There's no lock in with regard to us having to work with this lobbyist for the coming 6 months. And so I think of it as being a good move to use, given that we can't do this in-house, given that these services would be of value and better positions to see the outcome we want. And if we don't feel that way in a couple of months, we could change course. I'll pause there and see if any others sort of have differing opinions or want to reinforce something that I've said.
I mean, listen, no one can dispute the points you raised, and so I'm not going to repeat those about balance of workload. But what I will say is that, as the political landscape, and I'm not sure if this individual has the ability to navigate both of the federal and state levels. City lobbying is a little bit different, but at the federal and state levels, being able to have access to grant programs, funding, opportunities that are unique to our mission statement. You need someone on the ground, you need someone in the room that knows how to look for these benefits and these resources. And so I'm not able to get a clear picture of what you've listed here on the executive session, but in addition to all the things you discussed, if someone is in the ability to help us with grants, at least aware of an opportunity added, we want to have someone advocating on our behalf in conversations when we can't physically be in the room.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there'll be a bit of a learning curve for us here in kind of knowing how we best utilize someone who does this work. And there may be opportunities in the future to use them for other interests that we have where like a political friend is helpful. Are there any sort of reservations or things that we might want to look out for or question as a next step?
No, I think the only thing I would ask, Josh, is as you get reports on, what's getting done,
Yeah.
you just give the board a brief sense so that we understand and just make sure we're getting our money's worth. I understand that some of this is going to be on the lag and not everything is going to happen the first month, but I think wanting to get a sense of like, what is it that we're paying for, would be helpful as we go.
Yep. Smart. Anything else? Okay, so I think I'm going out of order, but this felt strategic in nature, and so we'll come back to this as an approval item when we get to that portion of the agenda today. So I think with that, that closes out strategic planning. We move into committee reports for today. Chris, is Alex joining us today, or is it just me and you?
I think it's just us. I can text Alex if we want. If anything, I know
we
there
said it
wasn't.
okay. We said it was okay for her not to take part tonight. So I think with that, let's see. Maureen and Jim, do you want to provide a brief report out on AFC stuff? Do you want me to take the lead and you guys can chip in?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Okay. All right. So in terms of updates here, Alex is busy in closing out the 21-22 budget. And so there's some final pieces there. You saw preliminary June data in the dashboard, but that's sort of the standing of things right now. School year wise, we're in kind of a weird place. We just moved into the new budget. There isn't a whole lot of movement with regard to spending, and we don't have our students yet. So we're kind of waiting, and we'll have more report out next month on the closeout, and then I kind of where things stand with the early phase of the 22-23 budget. Audit, according to Alex, things are going well. I've had good back and forth with the auditors, and so that's now kind of like in process and closing up. Michelle Kane, who represents our auditor, will have an AFC meeting. We'll join our AFC call in September to share more about her findings and things, but that's the status of the audit. And then there were a number of purchases that we discussed over the course of the call that we'll get into when we get to approval items momentarily. But a majority of those being kind of building renovation specific. And here's Jake. Anything else you'd add, Jim and Maureen?
Nothing on my.
Yeah, I think we'll just have more to talk about next month when we have solid data for the year, but don't expect any surprises either.
Yep. So we move on to DFC, and I think, hey, Jake. Jake, good to see you at 10 and 2, being safe.
Going.
And so with regard to the DFC call, we talked about the same purchase that we're going to get into momentarily, just because they were facilities related. There was a brief update in the student leader report on our building, our high school building, and the reclassification. Yeah. Sorry, did someone, okay, so I'll continue. So I think there was an update in the school year report on our high school building and the reclassification of our gym from a cellar to basement, basement to cellar. I don't remember which is which, but it's good news in that it does give our landlord the ability to build up if that option becomes viable. And so in terms of a possible expansion, it's maybe one step forward with other steps to go and exploring this as an option near term or midterm. So that's one update. We'll speak with the landlord, I think in the coming week as we schedule a follow-up meeting. And then we also talked a bit about fundraising in year 10. And so things that we discussed very early is like, it's year 10, so we should celebrate what's going on. There are seemingly a number of initiatives that we may have in play in the coming years that may be worthy of fundraising. And so we want to combine a 10th year celebration with perhaps some fundraising involved. But it'd be really great to sort of like pause and reflect on the past 10 years as a school and celebrate that and then look forward to the next 10. So I think it's a really golden moment to do that this coming year. So we're thinking about maybe something in the spring after the Board of Regents decision, which would then just give us full information on how to pitch things. So thinking maybe an April event. Sal, Jake, anything you'd add on the report out at the DFC? Cool. All right. And then the report out on the ECPC, I think during that call, we talked about the 6 goals that the committee has for the 22-23 school year. Many of those, a majority of those are an extension on 21-22. And so relate to outreach and advocacy for a possible downward expansion, thinking about board membership and looking for additional people who'd be really good for this team. Some trip initiatives with regard to our kids experiencing an international trip in the fall and having that also be something that our middle school does this coming year. It'll be our high school students going to Costa Rica. And so want to do more of that. And then a couple of partnerships that we'd like to sort of see through for the coming year to benefit kids in school. So those were the sort of main items. We also talked about this event coming up, which is also in the school year report next Wednesday. You're all invited to it. It's meant to be a showcase, an orientation. We're inviting all of our families to come in and get to know different aspects of our school. So as the school year report mentioned, think information tables, think like demonstrations, think like, athletics, having some fun with kids and different kind of events, some games going on, our step team performing, dance team with music performing, some food, and then there's an orientation component to that, which is required. And vision there is just short sessions by grade level with our families, with our kids about our shared commitments with one another going into the year. The big idea here being like we want to up family engagement. There's a lot that we don't tout early in the year that families might not know that we do that should be touted. And then again, the same page about how we best work together. So that's it. That's from 4 to 7 at our middle school this coming Wednesday, August 31st. So that was also discussed. Sal, did I miss anything?
Covered it all.
Awesome. All right, and I think with that, we move into SLC. And I'm going to move into a whole bunch of report outs on assessments. We'll probably take about 20 minutes or so, depending on Q&A, to talk through them. But there's a whole host of data coming out. Melissa and I are going to share out 4 different data points. Let me share my screen one more time. If you want to open that school year report, you can. It's also in the SLC agenda from last week.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Okay, so we talked graduation already. And so I think what's nice about this set of updates is that it runs the course of school. So we're going to look at some growth data. We're going to look at some proficiency data at the middle school without full information. We're going to look at some proficiency data at the high school, 2 tidbits, both AP exams and the Regents exams, with some comparison to prior years, but not necessarily with peer schools or the state, et cetera. We're still awaiting that. So we'll kick things off. So the first set of data I want to provide a report out on relates to our spring STAR assessments in reading and math. And so table is here. And what you're able to see in both tables is sort of our reading results by grade and then overall, and see the same thing for math. And what's being shown here is the degree of growth students make in comparison to peers over the course of the year in 2 windows: fall to winter and fall to spring. And so you'll see those with the blue and red bars down below. I'll just say again, like we use STAR right now to measure growth. And maybe it gives us some sense of where kids are grade-wise, but this is all new data to us. And so we're still mainly relying on it to assess growth over the course of the year in 2 skills, reading and math. As you know, we administer this 3 times a year. And so in looking at this data this year, a couple of notes. First, you got to have people or kids participate this in a strong way in order for us to have reliable data. And so the participation rates across the board for us were high enough such that we were able to sort of say, all right, this data is generalizable in terms of like number of kids who sat for the exam and looking at kind of averages over the course of grades and sites. So I think that's a good thing. And without that, we wouldn't be looking at this because it'd be of no use. In looking at performance growth-wise, a couple of things. So our goal is to have student growth percentiles at 60, which means that kids are growing at around the 60th percentile and faster than their peers. And that for us reflects somewhat accelerated growth, given our students, the majority of our students are coming in below grade level. If they're experiencing somewhat accelerated growth over time, they'll be well positioned to have doors open to them, either by high school or by graduation. So 60 is the goal. We didn't get there. And so overall, we're probably in the high 40s with regard to where things were from fall to spring. And so kids growing on average were perhaps slightly under average on average. So obviously we didn't get what we wanted to there. There are a couple of reasons for that when looking at both reading and math, but in both cases, we did not meet that target. And so there's some work to do there. The other thing that we saw here is that growth was more, was higher overall from fall to winter than fall to spring. There seemed to be a bit of relative backsliding with regard to growth in the spring. There are a few reasons that we think this could be the case. I'll talk about those momentarily, but obviously we'd like to see the same level of accelerated growth happening over the course of the year, and it wasn't that. So we're asking good questions about why that is and how we rectify that moving forward. Third bit here in terms of concerns, just like I know that particularly at the middle school, lots of competing commitments in the spring with roundtable state exams, other things. At the high school, we've got APs, we've got Regents exams, there's a lot. And so I think one of the concerns we have is just over testing and perhaps not having STAR be on our radar due to other exams needing to be on our radar because they impact kids directly, and that impacting both administration and the sort of fidelity of results. So in terms of next steps here and what we hope to do in the coming year and building on these results and seeing both really strong execution of the administration of exams and kids showing the sort of growth we'd love to have them experience, there are a few things. In terms of administrative practices, we're looking to kind of make some improvements such that, like, particularly in the spring, kids are showing off their very best stuff, and that this data then represents that. We don't feel, particularly at the middle school, Melissa, you may have different dealings at the high school, that kids grew less over the course of the spring than they did over the course of the fall and winter. And so it may have been more of a result of just the administration and competing commitments I mentioned earlier, which then makes this data less reliable for us in assessing growth. Melissa, you want to chime in and say a bit about whether that's true at the high school or not?
I would not discount that. I think our fall was a little bit more consistent. We had a number of variants throughout the spring. We had, we move into test prep where kids aren't necessarily learning more, they're just practicing it in a certain way. And at the high school, we have a number of assessments at the end of the year, which, allow for that reality of the arc of the year. I would also say this is not looking at individual student growth. This is looking at growth relative to other students during the test taking periods. So it might be different stories for different students. This is a national, international exam, and kids have different flow. So I'm not ready at the high school level to reject this reality. But I think that it's, incredibly contextual, and it's helpful to look at these alongside more absolute scores like grade level equivalency and Lexile for reading.
So this data is still relatively fresh in its use among our school. I think a lot of the thinking that happens with this data happens at the sort of senior levels of school, report outs here. And there's room to grow for us as a school, and having teachers use it specifically to drive their decisions over the course of the year. One move that we will be incorporating this fall, and I'm working on this now with our data analysts, is to have report outs of by teacher reports of like how growth was experienced by kids under their tutelage over the course of the year, and then having some conversations about sort of why, what went well, what perhaps didn't, what changes we make. And so I think it's valuable in that regard. The growth data here would come alongside some of the proficiency data with state exams that we're going to look at momentarily. So it would give teachers a snapshot of how the year went last year to then inform this year, and also inform just how we support, coach, and hold ourselves accountable to seeing the sort of growth that we aspire for our kids to see, experience. Is there any input or questions on sort of the growth end of things, and what this data shows as of June and as of I guess January of this past year?
My only question, Josh, would be, what is the data that goes to the authorizers in the supplement that we're going to give in the fall?
So good question. This would not be that. This would be internal to us. And so we're going to get into June results for Regents and to middle school state exam results momentarily.
Okay.
We can tout this. We can provide this as supplemental information if we wish to in our reporting, but we're not required to.
Okay, but those that we're going to talk about are the ones that we're going to submit, and we're working on that supplement at this point? Or?
Yeah, exactly. So the state has all of this data, and it's just about us kind of providing some context for what it is within that reporting.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think with that, let's move into the June Regents results, which are high school exams that kids took to end the year this year. Melissa's going to take that. And Melissa, what I'll do is, do you want me to just move down to the tables themselves?
And while you're moving, I'll say the nice thing about STAR is that because it is comparative, but we can get it throughout the year, is it can inform our instruction the way an actual Regents exam doesn't. So that's why it's really important to look at as a team here. But this is what's going to be reported. All right, so we're going to look
just quickly. I snuck in the data that we just received on students with disabilities. So just know that there's a second table there if you didn't see it.
I haven't seen it, so but you.
I can provide some headlines there too when we get to it.
You told me some things. So folks can look at this graph, but I want to give just a little bit of context. The last time that we took this exam was in 2019. Because of the pandemic, it had either not been offered or not been offered in a way that is valuable to look at here. So that's why you're seeing this huge gap. This was a standard full Regents examination compared to a full Regents examination, sit down on paper with pens. Another really important piece of context is that the The pass rate for Regents examination is a scaled score of 65. Generally, this year in May, the state released a sort of safety net or an option to appeal a score between 50 and 65, saying that the year is sufficiently inconsistent across schools that it couldn't be reasonably expected that all students would achieve a 65, and that shouldn't impact their graduation. So while we look at these Regents results for a couple of measures, one, to see how students are doing and what they're learning, especially compared to their peers, because different Regents have different standard kind of pass rates. We also look at it to forecast graduation. And in certain courses, a low Regents pass rate represents a low probability of graduating unless the student can turn it around. The relatively higher numbers in 2019 sometimes actually meant students were in a worse place towards graduation than they are now. So that's confusing, strange context. Explaining to parents, kids, and even teachers is sometimes tough. But I think that that's important to look at here. So giving folks an opportunity to read. There are a couple of other things that are maybe confusing on this graph. You'll see Algebra 1 twice. We offer an accelerated course to students in our 8th grade at our middle school. So you see a dip there that is a little bit more dramatic than the dip you see at our high school rates. US history was not offered this year. There was content that was deemed too offensive to administer following Buffalo. So there is no exam this year. And when we do see the exam, it will actually be a slightly different exam. So might not be a good comparison. Broad stroke story is that we do see a dip between how we performed in 2019 compared to 2002. There are a couple of places where we're pretty close, such as our Algebra 1, our English 1, and our living environment scores, where, no, not living environment, global history, scores. So questions on this one before Josh shows us a slide representing our students with disabilities?
So the graph we're looking at is of our students who took the exam, what's the percentage of them who had a passing score, right?
A passing score of a 65, but not the score necessary for graduation. So it's comparing 65s to 65s, even if reasonably students only need 50 in the 2022 darker blue score.
Does that make sense, Marion? Feel free to double back. This is complicated.
There's an incredibly complex amount of last minute exceptions that make longitudinal comparison challenging. But yeah, so this is comparing the score of 65 to the score of 65.
Okay.
And the state is given a bit of a handicap this year with regard to what's required to then not have to sort of take the exam again or not be held back, so to speak, because of not meeting what would be in past years of 65. So I think from our end, go ahead.
Living environment as an example here, I'm remembering the number, so it might be slightly imprecise, but right here it looks like we have, you know, a 13% drop, and that would be concerning. But actually, and we are concerned about that in some ways. There was a lot of context with science last year. However, we're actually looking at closer to 87%, I want to say, of students who have a sufficient score towards graduation. The state has said that this should not impact the student's ability to graduate, provided that they have a passing score in their class. So fewer actual students are in need of this Regents credit towards graduation than they were in 2019. Weird, but true.
Did you have any kind of internal targets you were looking to meet? I mean, were you trying to match 2019 or how, what's the read on these? I mean, sort of looking at the chart, it just looks like,
Our internal targets were set in fall of 2019 for 2020. So generally, for most of these, we were trying to meet or exceed these targets. We did not select them down. We did not adjust them down from there because we just didn't have the context to know what the correct adjustment was.
okay.
So I think from our perspective, given that we don't have state comparisons yet, looking back to 2019 gives us some sense of how do we do relative to how we did 2 years ago before COVID. And in my mind, and people may disagree here, I think if we are close to how we did in 2019, it shows that there was no backslide, which is what we don't want to see. We want to see growth in terms of how we're preparing students for these exams and what they learn from their courses. In a case like Algebra 1 in the 9th grade, we're seeing a bit of a dip, but like the circumstances were different. We have more kids who were absent, more staff who were absent. There was a lot kind of going on safety-wise at school. And so it's going to have some impact on performance. But if it's close, I feel good about that. There were some cases in which the tests were not close from 2019 to 2022, Earth Science being one example of that, both for our 8th grade who take the exam and for our 10th grade. And that's concerning. And so internal conversations about what we do there. There has been a staffing change at the high school, but that's the kind of context that is important to kind of have in mind as you look at these bars of varying levels depending on the course.
I got trying to get my head around the 2019. So is a passing grade on this test in Algebra 2 required to graduate?
No.
No.
Okay. So, because some of these, you'd say, well, 29% pre-COVID, how did people graduate? So what would, in that year, what would have been required to pass to graduate?
So the rules with Regents examinations are that students must pass one test within their core 4, and then one additional Regents credit, which can come from one of these tests. It can come from a Spanish district test. It can come from an AP art score. It can come from a career portfolio. It can come from a lot of places. So it's pretty varied and complicated. So many of these tests statewide have a very low pass rate, especially the advanced STEMS courses, especially the advanced STEMS courses, period. The ELA and histories have a higher pass rate. And many of them are thought of as kind of used towards like an advanced Regents diploma. They're not all considered sort of an exit examination for a course that all students are likely to pass.
Got it.
Some
Okay.
of them are, and some of them aren't.
And then US history, not giving that exam, was that a unity decision or the Regents
No.
decision?
No. A week before the exam, the state released a decision that something on there was problematic enough to not be able to administer to any New York State student. It will next be administered in June of 2023. And it will be the first time the test is administered in that style. So we will compare this number, but they're not going to be the same.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good questions, Jim. And I think, what I think you might be doing too is kind of juxtaposing these results with like graduation results. So I think your question might
It goes to
shed
Mario's
some light on
comment.
how things work.
Yeah, I think it was Marion who said it earlier that people may be ignoring the graduation metrics if this stuff doesn't hold up and rhyme at least with the graduation rate, right?
I can simplify that. For graduation, Algebra 1, English, US history or global history, and living environment are 4/5 most important courses. We'd have to offer US history for it to be important, but Those are the 4 important courses. If a student is not successful on that one, then only harder exams remain, and their path towards graduation is more challenging. Generally, we will remediate for those courses. So we are looking at all of our regions, but there are 4 that I, as a school leader, will make decisions, and I will triage if students don't do well in those courses.
Understood. Okay.
Ideally, they're doing well in all of them, and we don't have the triage, but those are the bread and butter graduation predictors.
So we should have state results relatively soon, which would then tell us how our kids did this year versus other kids in other schools across the state this year. That'll be helpful. Melissa, anything else before moving on? I guess I'll say a bit about students with disabilities. This is new data, just kind of out in terms of the analysis. But in general, I think the headlines, in comparison to our general school body or all students, in looking at how our students with disabilities did this year on their Regents exams versus how they did in 2019, you can see from the visual here, like there's some things to be proud of. Our kids, in many cases, outperformed how we did in 2019, pre-COVID. And then there are a couple of cases in which our students with disabilities outperformed our general school population on the same exam. And so Algebra 1 is one example, where 89% of our kids with disabilities passed that exam versus mid-60s among all students. So you might ask, what do you attribute that to? And I think, this year we had a really good ratio of adults to kids in classrooms. So kids were getting a lot of attention, particularly our kids with students with disabilities, as they had a learning specialist and a general content teacher in the room. We've had that before because of compliance, but I think there were heavier dosages of that this
there. That's the biggest change I can share. Some with retention of folks year over year, which is not going to be our story this year, would be the other thing that I would say.
So I think in the school leader report, we had mentioned, and during the SLC call, we had mentioned some of the next steps we were taking more immediately in response to this data. They're listed here in front of you now. I'm happy to kind of talk through any of those next steps, or Jake or Marion, who were on the SLC call last week, if you've got anything you'd want to bring to the attention of the board based on our discussion, let's maybe, would love to hear that now. Madonna, who's on, if you've got any sort of insights on Regents based on your day job, feel free to shout out. So I think if no additional insights, let's move into AP results for the year, and I'll hand the mic back to Melissa.
Okay, so again, we're looking at 2019, the percent of students earning a 3 or above compared to 2022 earning a 3 above. AP's students did take in the 2 prior years. However, they were slightly different in format. In 2020, students took a truncated exam across the world. In 2021, students took an exam online, which is a little bit different. So in some of these places, we're not seeing a comparison because in 2019, we did not offer the course. So if you see a number there that is blue, then we offered the course, even if that number is 0%. And if you do not see a number, we did not offer the course. So I'll give some folks an opportunity to look there. And I'm happy to take any questions about this now.
How does this compare with, our competitive set?
So our competitive set the College Board might ask you for more information on what that question asks. How does it compare to New York State as a whole, all test takers? It's lower across the board. how does it compare to how likely is any Unity child to walk out of Unity with credit on an AP exam compared to any child anywhere else in this country exam compared to any child anywhere else in this country equally. And the difference is our pass rates are often lower because our enrollment rates are much higher.
Yep.
So that is something we're proud of, but it does mean that this bottom line sometimes looks a little lower. And then we are, as a school for children of color, the students are more likely to take a class than nationally, and so more likely to pass a class. There's a lot of data, like we could talk about this for days and days and days. We're looking at one piece, and there's two pieces of data that are like both two truths that seem a little opposed or not. When we look at these pass rates, they're also threes, which is a solid pass. And I should say, we're looking at pass rates that's 3 or above. A 2 says the student is most likely, somewhere in here, I think is the verbiage I pulled from the College Board, the student is prepared to take an introductory college level course. So a 2 is still good. It's just not, you've done the college work already. It's you're ready for the college work. So we're looking at students who have exceeded a high school expectation here. And students are getting a 3. They're not like, whoa, that 5 is well prepared to take advanced level college work in this content. So what we also have is a great number of 1s, most by just a little bit. 52.4% of students scored a 1 on their AP exam. So you can see this bullet point sort of right above the chart there. So that's a lot of students scoring 1s, which is, we don't have evidence that the student is or is not prepared to take this college level course. However, in 2019, when students did this for the first time, 78% of students scored a 1. That's a huge difference. That is shows that students are performing at a higher level than they were before. They're moving up. So to move from the vast majority of students getting 1 to the vast majority of students getting 3, paradigmatically in the middle of a pandemic, would be a lot. It'd be wonderful, but it'd be a lot. But seeing this number of 1s inch down is something I am actually incredibly proud of. So that is just one thing to point out. That shows that there is some progress there in offering this curriculum over and over. And I would attribute that to very few new AP teachers last year and very few new AP teachers this year. We're hoping to have 1 new one, and that's it. We've got 10 returning teachers and 1 vacancy.
Hey, this is Earl. I guess the only thing I can say to that is tip my hat, Josh. I'm always one to provide more positive feedback than negative. I can't say I'm in Orlando now. And so I had a chance to go with my alma mater, UCF. UCF is actually rolling out, starting this past Monday, a curriculum. They have 17 courses that are almost college prep courses, because there's substantive evidence that you have students, even those who, no matter where they come from, exceed in their Regents courses, but still aren't proficient at a collegiate level. And so they've had an increase of almost 20% just at my alma mater of students that are not just signing up, but they're asking for those college prep and those college remediation courses before they're able to enter and start taking those entry-level courses. So I think we're on a better trajectory than we may even think, considering that all colleges are starting to address this middle ground where kids are graduating, but are they graduating as proficient as they was 5 years ago? Statistics say no.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Earl. Yeah, I think so. Where we're at right now with this is there have been some good, maybe we should look at this data again in the coming month with some historical stuff. There's a lot of rich data here, but I think, a majority of our kids experience an AP course in a given year in grades 10 and 12. I think our goal is for 100% of our kids to experience at least 1 AP course by the time they graduate, for a good portion to earn credit so they're not paying for courses once they're in school, and certainly to minimize number ones. We want kids getting something from the experience, and if they're able to show a 2 or higher, we're happy about that. So that's what we're aiming toward. I think some good longitudinal signs here with certainly room to grow.
Yeah. And for me, I could pull some related statistics that I think back this up, though I can't say it's causal. Like when we're looking at our college persistence rates and feeling proud of those, and we're looking at the number of students who are attempting college level coursework in high school, I don't think that those are unrelated.
We're going to move on to middle school state exam results unless someone has a final take, insight, question on things with regard to AP. Okay. So middle school results, some context here. So as Melissa said earlier, I think some of the context for Regents exams apply also to middle school math and ELA. It's been a few years since kids sat for this exam, since the spring of 2019. We don't yet have state results or how other schools did in our district. We don't have district results. It's been about 2 weeks since this data came out. Usually it only takes about 4 days for them to release things, but for some reason it's taking longer. So a little weird, but nonetheless, we just don't have data to compare this year to this year. So we're doing some of the same things and looking at how we did this year in comparison to how we did the last time we sat for these exams in a normal environment, which was 2017. Just a couple of things here, I think, with regard to attendance and someone else dropping off things. With regard to attendance this year, and because of attendance, there's going to be a bit of a dip with regard to what kids get from school on average. I just want to point that out without making excuses. We were stretched thin this year. So think about what we experienced in the late fall and winter and what we report out during board meetings. COVID was real, and there were some concerns it was disruptive. And so that's just, I think, a reality in looking at some of this data too. And so in terms of strengths, I'll name those first, and I'm looking at the ELA data. We outperformed when looking at how we did in 2022 spring of versus how we did in 2019 spring of. We outperformed in ELA overall proficiency wise. And so in 2022, about 37% of our kids demonstrated proficiency on this exam versus 36%. For students with disabilities, also an improvement over the last time we took the exam from 6% to 9% this past year. It's not a big increase, but it was an increase. So that's something to be happy about. Again, we don't know how the state and district did. That'll be more meaningful to us in thinking about how kids did, relatively speaking, but this is a good sign. In terms of concerns on the other side of things, we didn't do as well in math. In comparison to how we did in 2019. So we were 10 percentage points below how we did in 2019 for our entire middle school population who took the exam. 17% of students demonstrated proficiency on the exam in May, versus 27% back in 2019. That's a big question mark for us when we think about what kids experienced and the talent of teams. So we're kind of digging into what that data means now. With students with disabilities, with mathematics, there was also a dip. In 2019, 11% of students demonstrated proficiency. This year, it was 6%. So some big question marks there when looking at math, and some question marks looking at ELA as well, and ultimately get more data from our comparable groups, district of location and state. In looking at the ELA data here, you'll just note in the 6th grade, some really impressive numbers in comparison to how we've done in the past. And so 45% of our students demonstrating proficiency. That's the grade and level that did best on this exam. In terms of 7th grade, we've seen some concerning trends in the 7th grade in past years. Didn't see that to the same level this year. And so a third of our kids demonstrated proficiency versus 24 3 years ago. And then in 8th grade, we had a bit of a dip in comparison to where we were 3 years ago. I think from a readiness level, there were some concerns this year with our 8th grade, and I think that is represented here by our kids doing not relatively as well as how 8th graders did at our school 3 years ago. Are there questions about ELA? I'm going to move on to next steps momentarily. I'm going to move on to math, but I want to just quickly say, are there questions or insights? All right, let's move into math. Same general visual here. You'll note that in the 6th and 7th grade, similar results. Nice to see us outperform where we were 3 years ago in the 7th grade. Again, 7th grade has historically been a concern for us as there have been dips. 6th grade is a big question mark for us, in that I feel as if we've got really strong teaching going on at that grade level in mathematics. So these results don't line up with that. So there's some questions that we're digging into about how, why, what happened here to explain that. Because I think generally speaking, our kids in the 6th grade right now are relatively more ready for 6th grade work, as demonstrated by the 6th grade results. And so not seeing that in math is puzzling. 8th grade was perhaps our biggest concern, with only 9% of our students scoring proficiently on this exam. Also a surprise in thinking about some of our students took Algebra 1, about a third or fourth of the class. Historically, those students do fine in this exam. They didn't do as well this time around. And so they're questions. Again, we don't know how the state did overall. It's possible that the state in middle school math also did not do well on average, and that would explain some of this away. We'll know more then, but I still think there's some deep dive work to do in looking at this data and improving on it. Let me pause there and ask if there are any questions about math before moving into the next steps and the analysis itself.
What do the authorizers look at? They look at, the raw data, they look at comparison, they look at us against state or district. What's the most relevant?
Yep. So I'll work down here. So graduation, and then look at the benchmark, I think is 80% graduation. And then the state level, I think, is meaningful there. So on that measure, we look really strong. That's for all students as well as the subgroups. They also then look at Regents exams, which feed into high school graduation. We talked about those already, and so we will submit those. But I think the graduation number is still the most important of that, and that Regents exams are kind of like an input toward graduation. Not unimportant, but they would look at that as well, and that's reported out. And then they would also look at middle school exam results. And so ELA and math look at proficiency, look at trending toward proficiency. And so those values are meaningful in comparison to our district of location or districts where a majority of our kids reside. So those will be the values they look at mostly in thinking about benchmark 1.
What do we do with the data? Sorry, not the data. I mean, in terms of kids' actual trajectory. Like at classical, we're having the issue now that the scores came in late, and so at classical, if you're improficient in both math and English, you're not promoted.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of like there's like a few last minute cases of people who, I don't know, so that's an issue. But does it have any implications on a student's basically, moving on to next grade if they fail the state exams?
We use life retention scale, which has a variety of measures. Using a single measure like state exam performance is not recommended by lights, though it is a factor. So it could theoretically have that. Theoretically, sorry, it's been a long day. I ran a whole day of PD. Theoretically, it could be an element of that. However, lights requires us to look at many measures, many of which we have. So that it's not stymieing us in making decisions, though it is one element that we would have used.
So Jake, I think the work we'll be doing here is that there may be students that take part in interventions. So we'll use, reading levels as well as ELA exam results to then factor in which students are experiencing doses of small group tutoring or individualized tutoring on kind of reading skills. And the same would happen in math. So I think that's sort of one concrete measure here. We use some of this to then identify students who would be ready for Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. And so based on how they did in 7th grade, as well as how they did in their coursework, teacher recommendation, we may place some students in Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Typically, that's about a third of our kids. So I think those are a few concrete ways we use this data now. And I think from like the other angle, it's just like talking to teams, talking to department chairs about, curriculum, about standards, about, which standards perhaps did kids underperform in, and what changes to the way in which we teach those standards might we implement in the coming year. There may be staffing changes with regard to grade level and those sorts of things too. And so those ways, I think, are how we've used the data in the past and how we're beginning to use this data now, which then gets into kind of next steps for us. And so some work that we've got to do is, once we get district state data, compare how we did in comparison to students at other schools and across the state. In terms of the underperformance in math, there's a deeper analysis at the standard level and perhaps at the sequence level with the curriculum that is worth looking at. Like, did we misstep somewhere? But again, we'll know more as we kind of know how our kids did versus their peers. The other work we're doing right now, go ahead, Jake.
Just on that point, I sent it to you while we were already in the meeting, but I got Leicester Classical sort of accumulated some data just via like anecdotally amongst a bunch of charters, and directionally it's the same thing you experienced relative to 2019. A little lower on ALA, more significantly lower on math. For what it's worth, Leicester's theory is that math's more conceptual or abstract, maybe, and so harder to learn. But in the beginning, when you're first learning to read, he says, language is completely abstract. But then once you sort of gain that, and it can be done a little bit easier remotely than math, and so that's where he thinks there's been more learning loss in math. No real basis for that other than just conjecture.
Yeah, that's helpful as a comparison point. In thinking about this, I think one of the other important steps right now that we're doing is looking at our IAs over the course of this past year and our mock exams over the past year to see which tests we administered seem to be most predictive of the results that we're now looking at today. And then saying to ourselves, all right, why isn't it predictive? What changes might we make? And then what might we lean on most heavily in the coming year to give us the most reliable data we need before the exams to then make decisions and position ourselves in ways that have kids showing off their very best stuff. I mentioned this earlier, but there's just results meetings. So we're now kind of prepping some reports for our middle school team with regard to how kids did growth-wise, proficiency-wise over the course of last year for teachers, as well as then providing reports to our teachers who are working with kids this year on the kids that they're now going to be working with over the course of the year. So a few reports that I think will be valuable that we haven't been able to do for a couple of years because we haven't had testing data, that I think then just provides information, perhaps even more motivation in a very objective kind of way. What's possible and where gains can be made and should be made.
Just one more thing on the comparative data, and I know this is sort of not fair to bring up sort of live, but I still think, like I said, the changes relative to 2019 are similar to ours, or at least directional. But I still, just on an absolute basis, at least this is a smattering of 10 schools, 10-ish charters, but it still feels like on an absolute basis we're struggling. And I think we have to sort of face this at some point, and say either we're going to make that this is something that we really feel like is a must have for the school, or we have to come up with some theory as to why it's not important. Because I guess it's troubling to me as a board member that on a standardized assessment, we're really having trouble comparing with our peers.
I think, well, I guess that to that point, I'd be curious to know what the sample was that is being examined. Was it elementary school or middle school?
These are, I think this is all middle school.
Okay. And then the other question I would have, and this goes back to the conversation earlier, is how many of these middle schools have elementary schools. And so I know in kind of also working alongside a prior principal at Leicester School that like 60% of kids as of sixth grade come into the sixth grade proficient because they're working with kids in elementary school. 20 to 25% of our kids do. So less than half of the kids we have or bring in as of sixth grade are underskilled with regard to grade level, whereas a school that is feeding from an elementary school is in a very different standing. So I think it's just, for me, it's a very, very direct nod toward an elementary school where we're working with kids from kindergarten through fifth grade would mean really amazing things for our middle school results in terms of proficiency.
I think it's important to realize that we also, the majority of our students still come from District 16, which is a district with a number of charter schools, and the entrance for many of those schools is fifth grade, not sixth grade. So there's also a differential there, and we do see that the majority of students are coming with not performing with their state peers yet. So the starting point's a little bit different, which is why growth is really important, and we're hoping that a couple of these moves will be supportive. I think that has to be part of our story. I agree that we need to also have the supports necessary to get kids there eventually, but understanding that like it cannot just be plotted with the same story.
Yeah, do we have a sense of how those rates that we're looking at compare to the proficiency of the kids coming in? Because in past years, I think when we've looked at that, the difference wasn't that significant, right? I mean, I think if we're going to say, well, you know, part of this is due to where they are when they come in, I think it would be interesting to see what difference we're able to make in a year and 2 and 3.
Well, and that's what the growth data provides. So
Yeah,
and what we're seeing is we're not seeing the accelerated kind of growth that we would like to see. No matter where kids come in, they should grow in an accelerated fashion.
Right.
We're doing good work. And
Yeah,
so the STAR data didn't present that. Some of that's due to administration and like the reliability of data. Some of that's just real. Like we need to do a better job of teaching and learning each and every day so that kids are learning more.
But I think that's the key point. You look at the blue bars above here on the slide, going from 21 to 23 and then down to 9. If this 60% number, you know, if we were inheriting fifth graders that we had worked on, you know, for those years, and they would be at 60 instead of 21, I understand that story, and it's you know, it makes all the sense in the world. What doesn't make sense is going 21 to 23. I expected to go to 27 or 29 the next year and up and dropping to 9. That's the part that is weird about this last year. You know, it didn't happen before, you know, you saw it go to 34, 2018, 2019. There's something there going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that's going on there is some variation in teacher quality. And, you know, I think as leaders, our job is to sort of stabilize that and have quality be somewhat consistent across the board and getting better over time. And so, you know, I think that's some of the story here. There are some nuances by grade level where like not every grade level is the same, but like, you know, in looking at the ELA scores, like there's no reason why we're going to have a vast majority of our kids returning to our school as seventh graders from sixth grade this past year. If 45% of them demonstrated proficiency in sixth grade, we should have 50% performing proficiently as of seventh grade and more so. So I think that's real. And that I think is where we can get there.
Yeah. The 8th grade cohort is one in which we never had data. We never had, am I doing the math right here?
Yeah,
we never
are.
had state test data. So we can't really see how they did relative to themselves. But for the 6th and 7th grade numbers, we should see that we're doing our jobs if we're seeing that percentage inch up.
Okay, so I'm comparing, I got it. This is not a linear, okay, yeah.
But still, but roughly speaking, Jim, we should still see some of that pattern unfold.
And
This is not exactly longitudinal, but if you had the longitudinal data, what's your sense of what would have happened what you would have seen with that 8th grade cohort? Would they have been going from 6 to 7 to 9, or?
We have
of
longitudinal
these.
data, like from like 2014 going to 2019 for those years in which things were consistent. With COVID, it's hard to sort of say what that cohort would have done over time. But we do track that data and have it for consistent years in which the test is administered.
Yeah.
Okay,
And this 8th grade cohort is just so special in that we have no external except for information about them. And that they did, they were so COVID affected as a cohort. It was a story of their entire middle school career. So it's really difficult. That's like
yeah, I get it.
so much context in that one. The 6th grade, we should see that is really the bellwether for me, right? If they're going down year over year, they've had last year was imperfect, but a more normal experience. So that's a really important grade to track. And last year's 9th grade is a really important grade to track, though I think it'll take another 2 years before high school things don't have all those asterisks next to them as far as like regents, waivers and all of that. Those are our places to look.
So I just noticed, this is great. We've kind of dug in the data for a good period of time. This has been a 2-hour meeting with lots to talk about. We've got to move on to approval items too. So I want to be aware of people's time, not a Zoom on an evening. So Jim, do you want to move on to approval items? That was the last of the committee reports for today.
Yeah, I'm just looking at which ones we need to spend time on.
I think we can do this in 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, let's rip through it and then we'll. Okay, so the first item, I have my mouse back, so we're good. First item up for approval, the minutes from the meeting on June 21, 2022. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, just in terms of quorum, if you're on, you got a video on, folks.
Oh, right.
I move to approve.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, next item, minutes from the meeting on July 27. Any questions or comments there?
Just to note, nothing was approved during that meeting, but we did hold the meeting and we will post minutes for it on our website as we're supposed to. So that's why it's represented.
Okay. All in favor? Thank you. Next one is the executive session on August 12th, which I didn't attend, so I don't really have any comments. Any comments, questions there?
Jeanette gave it a review. Jeanette, would you add anything?
No, I thought it reflected our discussion.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Replacement of windows at Driggs. Josh, you want to just give the bullets? I think we've talked about this.
Yeah, I spoke with both the DFC and the AFC about this. We've got a grant. We'd like to use the grant to replace windows. This was something provided by the state. We're now working through paperwork to have it fully approved. We would pay for this and then get reimbursed. It's about $120,000, but it's paid for. So, Mario, to answer your question, these are really good windows. They're insulated, noise reduction, the whole bit. So we feel good about this, and it would add to the experience at our school. So that's the approval item for today. There's a little bit of work to do in filling out some additional paperwork. There's a few things that Mario and Jeanette are going to look at from an attorney standpoint, and that's kind of where things are now.
I did a quick review of the lease. It looks like this is squarely in our.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but it's reimbursed anyway. So, yeah, but to be clear, we are kind of exposed. We spend the money and then we get reimbursed. It's not like they sent some money first. So there's a small exposure there. Okay. Any questions? All right. All in favor? Thank you. Purchase of new tables.
Yep. So, some wear and tear showing. We've got some tables that aren't really desks that aren't really working for us at the high school, particularly with use of laptops and things where you just need more room, more space. And so we'd like to replace the small desks with tables, which we have in many of our other rooms, and they work really well. We're looking to go with the same vendor and have one quote that we're waiting for on each other we have. So we have 3 bids. Total cost of this would be up to $42K if approved. This would be paid for through FOMB as we see it being kind of more significant and somewhat facility related.
Do you want to get into the well, let's vote on this, but there is the issue of the FOMB adjusting rent to reflect some of these things that FOMB is paying for, but we can.
Yeah, I think that's probably an offline conversation at the community level and then bring it back.
Yep. Okay, all in favor?
Do you need the board of the FOMB to vote on that kind of thing, or?
Yeah.
We do.
Okay.
Look forward to having you in that meeting too, Jake.
I'm only joining that meeting once you get me out of these meetings.
Soon enough.
Okay. Okay, the exterior doors, renovation of exterior doors.
Same thing. We got some old doors. They've been there for a long time. They're not totally secure. So sometimes safety comes in and the doors have been propped open. Sometimes they don't close fully. We've had repairs done. There are 7 doors in the building in the front and back. We'd like to have them all replaced. It comes at a cost of $42. We have bids for that. This is the best bid, most responsive vendor we've spoken with. And I think it'd also be really good for heat and keeping heat in. The hallways are cold in the wintertime because of the doors.
Sounds good. Just make sure you get the right fire. I don't know if you've seen that issues. Okay, yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, sounds good. I vote for.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Bus company.
Bus prices have gone up, but we still have ample kids, even more kids this year who want that as a service, particularly in our 6th grade. And so the cost of the best service that we found thus far is about $99,000 for the year, or $550 a day. It is not cheap, but again, that's the best price we've seen. And so obviously, in terms of recruitment and having kids and families come to our school, a bus is necessary for that. And so we've used the bus service in the past. It wasn't as expensive in prior years, but because of general prices going up, it's reflected in the quote we received here too. Chris, anything you'd add?
Nope. By the end of the school year, it probably won't be at 99 because that includes state test days and roundtable days where not all the students have to come every day. So the end of year price, I'm assuming, will probably be closer to 94, 95.
Okay, any questions? All in favor? Yeah. PR, Josh. We talked about this.
This is, oh, yes. And so I guess we talked about this during the strategic planning part of the meeting today. This is with regard to then engaging a lobbyist monthly, given the terms I mentioned earlier, the scope, the monthly costs, et cetera.
And I think just to echo, I think Marianne was one touched on, we do need check-ins on their, they presented that list of things they're going to do for us. We do need every 2 weeks a check-in because, if it's not working out, we need to kill it. But that's my only comment.
Yeah, noted. I think monthly reports make sense. And I can think about the committee report out with, it's probably the ECPC, maybe with the AFC thrown in somewhere, and then we report out to the full board.
For me, it would just be helpful just trying to understand how these things work, who the person talked to, what the content of that conversation was, what the strategy behind it was. I had no idea how this stuff works. So it'd be nice just for my personal education to get something like that every month.
You might get some hands-on experience. You'll have to throw on the coat and tie and visit with the right folks. So know that you might be on the road here and there, Jim.
I think from an AFC perspective, I think we want to know where the money's going. These are kind of sensitive areas, so we need to understand how the money's being spent.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, all in favor? Thank you. Employee handbook update.
Yeah, so a few updates to it, none that I think are significant or material. We are including a component that has not existed before and explaining and providing some info on our 403B match. We've got an updated calendar being represented there. Critical days, which are days in which we really want people in the building because they're important to kids' education. And so we prefer for folks not to take days off during those days. That's included and updated because the calendar is updated. And then some additional guidance on updated paid family leave based on information we've been provided. That will be the update or the series of updates in this edition. Marion and Jeanette, just going back to our conversation yesterday, will very likely leave out the forfeiture of kind of payment for the August stuff we discussed and do that in the spring of next year, moving into 23, 24.
Yeah, I mean, if we can figure it out before you gotta put the handbook out, great, but I think we can.
Yeah, no time pressure on our end with regard to this. It wouldn't apply until next year.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Written policy for remote virtual board meetings.
Jeanette, Chris, you want to add anything here? I'm not as well versed in this as you are.
Yeah, so when COVID hit, the state came out with temporary rules that allowed this board and other boards to meet virtually, but they were only temporary. And so they came, they recently released more permanent rules that are a lot more detailed around our functioning virtually. One of the requirements in those rules is that the board formally adopt a policy saying that we're allowed to meet virtually. So we need to do that in order to check that box. Anything you'd add, Chris?
The one thing I would add, moving forward, I think if possible, we'll make not just the YouTube video live and available to the public, but also the Zoom link, so anybody can join pretty much from anywhere. That we've been doing that for the past few months, and nobody has joined. But yeah, that'd be one thing to add.
Do we have to do that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we
was
should.
the question, is that required? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You have to make the public access not just to your physical locations, but also to the real-time virtual location. And so I don't know how you do that without the Zoom link.
Jim, was there a reason why you wouldn't want them to have access?
I just, Zoom, yeah, you can get Zoom bombed. I'm sure we all have been at this point after 2 years of this, but, and, can we kick people out if they get in, or do we have to leave them in? And can they hijack your meeting? And, that's what you think about in these things.
Like
Josh can mute us. He can mute us and put us out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't pressed that button with this group yet.
That's the issue. Okay, I think, look, from my personal perspective, it does help people. Our attendance is better, even if it's some are remote and some are live. So that's my view. But anybody else have any questions, concerns? Okay, all in favor? All right, thank
So
you.
with that, I guess the move would be maybe Chris drafts something and gets some feedback from people offline, and then we bring it to the board for approval next meeting.
Well,
Or is it?
Or we approve.
Are we approving the
Yeah.
application of this and we're good to go?
I think we should approve the ability of the board to meet virtually, subject to formalizing the document or something. We can word it better, but I think it's better to get the approval sooner rather than later.
Okay.
The rules took effect.
Okay.
okay, I don't see any public comment. Do you want to move into, we're running late. You want to move into executive session?
I think we can, sure. And then we can keep it really short unless people want to talk. There's nothing I have to bring to the agenda tonight. So